Now, this book, Alien Goddess, it's a continuation, but also a bit of a sidetrack to your first book, The Other Goddess, in that you're really addressing some of these issues around AI and transhumanism and posthumanism that are
Yeah.
really, coming up in a fervor in our culture now. I mean, everywhere I look, there's talk about new AI developments that seem so promising and hopeful, and
Mm.
on the other side, a lot more stories coming out about AI abuses, how AI is leading people into psychosis or suicide or mere depression, giving people really bad advice about their food and diet.
Mm.
And, for a couple of years now, watching this from my perspective, which is really focused on the soul, my bumper sticker about all of this is anytime you outsource your thinking or creativity to AI, you're giving up a piece of your soul. And that's been my clarion cry, just trying to get
Mm.
people's attention to the effect that their engagement with this technology is having on them. And, on one hand, I'm really sad to see what's happening to people. On the other hand, I'm kind of glad because I think people will actually start to wake up, and maybe we're starting to see some of the pushback now with the boycotting of ChatGPT and
GPT.
OpenAI. But we'll see. We'll see where it goes
Mm.
because Chat GPT bad, but here's its nicer, friendlier, more ethical alternative, Cloud GPT, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think there'll be a lot of this going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So obviously this book is a response to what's going on in the world, but I would love to hear from you, kind of your take on it. What's the lay of the land? What are we dealing with from your perspective?
Mm. So perhaps I'll first start with the genesis of the book. So because which was extremely complicated for me. So when every time you write, about the soul, you go through personal transformation as well. So that was a huge yogic fire or tapasya, right, for me,
Yeah.
because I read a book by my favorite academic and a beautiful writer, Diana Pasuka, about non-human intelligences, and I completely adore her. And then the last interview in this book called Simone, or Moon Lady, she's actually talking about, she's a great proponent and enthusiast of transhumanism and posthumanism. And it tore my soul apart. I didn't, so I had to go through the whole process, and I'm going through this in part two of the book a little bit at the beginning, like, because for first time in my life, I felt that I encountered evil, actually, because I always believed that evil is a form of ignorance. And then I eventually arrived that this is also a form of ignorance. But also, I didn't want to call anybody evil, right? I'm not a holy inquisition. I don't know what's right. I just went with my feeling. Suddenly I felt that my soul was crushed. So I had to process it. And as I was processing it, I realized that it is not even AI, it is not the woman, it is the ideologies behind AI.
Right.
Okay, so can I just say so? And then, of course, it affects what AI does. But I'm not for
Yeah.
AI, but the
Can
ideal.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to pause because I'm recognizing that some people listening may not have a clear idea when you say transhumanism and posthumanism, what
I
those
will try.
ideologies or movements are all about. And just a note that Diane Pasuka is, I believe, a religious scholar from the US who got
Yeah.
really into UFO studies
Yes.
and as mystical experiences and that kind of thing,
Yes,
right?
which is a fantastic first book, was very transformational for me.
Hmm.
And her other book was transformational for me because I had to write to her to tell her I have to write a book in response to your book,
That's right.
it was very difficult
Yeah.
for me because I adore her and I knew that it may strain a kind of long distance friendship, right? I don't know if it did, but probably. So perhaps I'll first define transhumanism. So as I was reading this book, it was the first time that I was actually academically introduced to transhumanism. And transhumanism basically claims, and I'm oversimplifying everything here, right? that we can transfer human consciousness into a robotic AI body, right?
Hmm.
And then also there is a kind of transitional stage in which this is a kind of cyborg stage, right? When we gradually surrender to this. So for example, you get a Neuralink or chip in your mind first, and it's good, you'll be told, because and to a degree, for some people, who have neurological diseases or something, it will help them to coordinate better and so on. But also you start to introduce this foreign technology into your consciousness, basically, into your
Right.
brain
Which has
first.
an input and an output.
It has an input and an output, and
Yeah,
you are not controlling it.
that's
So,
right.
so this is also a matter of control,
There's
right?
no firewall on your Neuralink.
Yeah.
They need access, they tell you.
Yeah, they need access denied, access, so this is one thing. And then another thing, I actually, after I wrote the book, I was invited to be part of this kind of consciousness community, which is in the US, and there was a young woman there who was just at a conference somewhere in Finland, and she's obviously great. Not obviously, but she's a great enthusiast of AI. And she says, and you were the fantastic discoveries. And, soon we'll have a second brain, which will be a digital brain, and we'll think faster, and I was horrified more and more, right? So eventually, I'm not even talking about control here, which is obviously a separate issue because we are focusing here on spiritual aspects of this. The truth is that had to jump into a reflection about what consciousness actually is.
Mhm.
And that the consciousness, the engineers, the engineers, and the AI proponents talk about is really rational, logical consciousness, which is really what I call kind of a masculine form of mind. And this is not anything against men, because I have a very strong masculine side in my mind as well. Like
Mhm.
very logical, rational, discernment. It has its purpose, right? So
Yeah,
it's not about gender. Yeah.
I find that seems to be part of the kind of the Polish consciousness. I meet all these Polish women who are very
Brain.
strong-minded, brainy, you know,
Yeah.
and strong-willed too, which I really enjoy. A lot of fire there.
Maybe, yeah, but fortunately it comes with fire, right? Because fire has, it's good purifying purpose.
Yeah.
So this is not but this is the dead end of this kind of form of consciousness. It's transhumanism or, AI, right? Because they genuinely believe, like the woman in Diana Spasuka's book, that this is actually good for humanity. You can be immortal, they say, because you can download your consciousness into a robotic body. You can choose the body and so on.
Right.
And
Yeah, so just generally, their ideas are based on a conception of consciousness as being an epiphenomenon of the brain,
yes,
and so is therefore limited, or the evolution or development of human consciousness is slow or at its pinnacle. And now with the technology, we can kind of upgrade our
that's
consciousness.
right.
But fundamentally, it's based on a very limited neurobiological concept of consciousness. And we're talking, I think, from the position of consciousness, like big C consciousness, that we're maybe
Absolutely.
a
So they even
receptacle
say
of. Yeah.
that's right. Absolutely. They say you can compute faster, you can
Right.
calculate faster. So they actually equate in their huge ignorance, can I say, equate human consciousness with computing, basically, because this is
Mhm.
what they know best, in their engineering minds. And I really have no respect for this now at the moment, Yes, like they're very smart in one small way, but they're getting into something, even if they work by themselves, which I don't think they do, and we can talk about it later if you want, that they actually have no concept of what consciousness actually is. What you say, capital C consciousness. And in just for the sake of simplification, I call it like kind of goddess consciousness or intuition or intellection or buddhi, right? This is this other form of consciousness that is available for us, which is more holistic, that is more intuitive, which is more soul oriented, which is more heart oriented, or what I prefer to use soul, because heart is often associated with, also confused emotions and so on. So I prefer to say soul, higher actually form of consciousness, which has actually been suppressed for millennia now, mostly by organized religions, but also by society in general. I think there is some kind of agreement about it, actually. And this form of consciousness, which is actually a potential for true transcendence, is going to die with this transfer of so-called consciousness into a computer body, into a robotic body, right? So it is quite interesting. Even on the Humanity Plus side, they say you don't even need a body; you can just be a computer program, and then you will be completely free. And I
Yeah.
think that the scope of that ignorance, was just totally overwhelming for me. That they really have no sense of spiritual self, right? Which is not embodied in faster calculation, which is not embodied in faster thinking, which is actually this other way of knowingness, right? Your intuition, your gut feeling, right?
Yeah.
Your connection to nature, your connection to spirit, right?